Peter's being quizzed already, probably about creation care questions. He must get those all the time. Peter Bogart, part of our creation care ministry, is definitely the go-to person for creation care questions. We're always quizzing him, asking him about such things. We had him as a guest speaker in Circle 4 because we are covering a lot of topics with climate change and creation care subjects. So he even came to Circle 4. I think it might be the first time we've had a male presenter in our women's Bible study, but it was wonderful. And we are glad that Peter is here today to talk with us about the Hope Church Carbon Footprint Team. And I'm sure all of you will have questions also at the end, but we welcome Peter and thank you.
My job this morning? Okay. It was green when I looked at it. Okay. Just under the banner of Creation Care Ministry, we've had a working team we call the Carbon Footprint Team. And that working group is what we're going to report out this morning, where we're at in our conversation and discussion, to give you a sense for what we're looking at and we hope we all can look at together. But so here's kind of the agenda for the morning. I want to take a look at why is this topic even important? Why do we bring it up? We want to ask ourselves, well, carbon footprint, what's a carbon footprint? Okay. We're going to take a little look at the Hope Church building and our utilities. We are thinking we may want to look at a solar option for Hope Church, so we'll spend a lot of time looking at that. And then we'll take a look at what next steps are and then questions after that. So that's kind of the plan for this morning. And why is this important? You know, the continuing addition of carbon pollution to Earth's atmosphere is driving major negative changes to our experience of climate. Continued movement in this direction calls into question the ability of all life on Earth to flourish. The tools needed to blunt this change are readily available and will be effective if employed. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about climate science this morning, but you need to understand that's in the background of everything we're moving forward from. We understand what science is telling us, we understand what the implications are, and we need to understand what our response as a faith community might be. So this is a time for people of the Scriptures to speak out and to act. We know that all dimensions of human relationships are broken, with God, within marriage and families, and with the earth itself. Having been blessed ourselves by a restored relationship with God, it is now our calling to join with God's work in restoring all of creation. Okay. The chart you're looking at is sort of it's almost become traditional in climate change circles to just document what kind of changes are taking place globally. And we are in a warming globe. The changes you're seeing here represent changes from 1961 to 2019. The brighter the color, the warmer that portion of the Earth has become. And the most obvious one is the Arctic. And that's leading to a lot of the discussions you hear about ice melting, oceans rising, that sort of thing. So, like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time on climate science, but understand that's the driving force behind what we talk about this morning. So we had a carbon footprint team, and these are the folks who volunteered to be a part of that. Don Bolkins, myself, Peter Christensen, Myra Gargano, Jenny Hookman, and Matt Van Zetten. And we're saying a special thanks to Dave and Weiland, who's with us this morning. For how long yet, Dave? 2 weeks. 2 weeks yet, moving to Minnesota, okay? But Dave's background as an administrator was really helpful to us in understanding how to pull our thoughts together and our strategies and our priorities as we thought through what this issue entails. And thank you to Ben Sickink, who on 2 occasions took us to all those parts of the building that nobody ever sees. Okay, I've got some pictures. I might add, when it came to the attic, those who had enough courage to take the tour. Okay. So what's a carbon footprint? You can kind of pick out each word in the phrase, and a footprint, is an observable change in the physical world which results from the activity of human persons. So, this could have been clear-cutting a forest. It could have been dumping pollution into the ocean. There are any number of ways in which human beings have a footprint that impacts the world. In this particular case, we're talking about carbon pollution. So burning of fossil fuels, what consequence does that have? So that's why we're talking about a carbon footprint. And we're talking about the impact which results from the combustion and or release of fossil fuels. And when you put the 2 words together, the implication is that you can come up with a metric. If this is what you want to talk about, how do you measure it? Is there a way of quantifying what's the damage, how is it progressing? So we're going to be taking a look at a carbon footprint. That's the background for what the terminology really means. And where did that kind of terminology even come from? Well, according to Tom Greenwood, while the term ecological footprint had been coined by ecologist William Rees in 1992, it was the global oil company BP who burned the concept into the public consciousness. With the help of an advertising agency, Ogilvy and Mather, they repackaged the ecological footprint as an individual person's carbon footprint. And I think you begin to see the subtle shifting of responsibility here. That, quite frankly, the oil companies are not causing carbon pollution. You are. You chose to drive that big fancy car. You chose to eat lots of red meat. Don't blame us. This is on you, folks. Okay? And they very carefully crafted that notion. So not that part of the story notwithstanding, this is still a really valuable metric. We are engaged in producing carbon pollution. We need to understand what our role in that process is. So this is still a really valid metric. We are not the first people to be thinking about the potential to deal with our carbon footprint. You saw the poster as you came in this morning on the pedestal back there. There are 60 churches in Michigan alone that already have solar panels on their building. And so we have a short clip here, 7 minutes, from one of the churches in Traverse City, and this will kind of set the stage for thinking about our work.
This is a story of one little church, in the middle of one little town, in the midst of God's great and beautiful creation. God's grace shines on the church, and the church loves God and God's creation. But now the church, and the whole world around it, has entered a point of crisis. Climate change looms large and threatens us all.
The time is now.
God's creation is being ravaged by misuse.
The time is now.
Priceless resources are being squandered for profit.
The time is now.
Vulnerable communities of color and the impoverished are already experiencing the profound effects of this crisis.
The time is now.
The time is now. The time is now.
The time is now.
But where do we start?
We begin right at home. Our church building has aged. Old, inefficient systems not only cost us more money, but they spew pollution into the atmosphere. So our church did a carbon analysis, and we discovered some interesting facts. Our church emits almost 158 metric tons of carbon waste per year. Really? Now, if you break that into the four main segments of our operations, you'll see that facilities is by far the biggest polluter. So, we zoomed in on facilities. Now watch. As we break up our main areas of facility operation, it becomes obvious where the greatest carbon impact occurs. By focusing on how to reduce our biggest source of carbon, we arrived at bright idea number 1.
Nothing lights up a room like a great idea for carbon reduction. And nothing reduces better than lighting that room with LEDs. Replacing our lights would reduce our annual carbon by 23.9 tons. 23.9 tons. That's equivalent to the annual emissions of 4.2 homes. Not only that, but we could save $5,600 annually in utility and maintenance. Now that's a bright idea worth reaching for. Wait a minute, what's that noise? Uh-oh, not again.
We are long overdue for a boiler replacement. We can avoid a catastrophic failure and expenses, but also can stop sending so much energy straight through the roof. A new unit not only saves us time, money, and maintenance, but helps us minimize our environmental impact as well.
Hey, if all you're gonna do is fix what we already have, you're not investing in the future. I am part of the future, and I say the sky is the limit! And look at all the wasted space up here. What if we got solar panels? We'd invest in a renewable resource of energy, zero emissions for my future. And hey, you boomers out there, it saves money too. Providing 80% of our church's energy by solar would save $6,000 in just the first year. And we'd pay off all the cost of going solar in less than 14 years. Free electricity and zero pollution? Now that's a future I can approve.
So, 3 bright ideas. 1 for immediate impact on our emissions. 1 to address our biggest facility issue now. And 1 to invest in ongoing sustainability. 3 bright ideas for 1 brighter future. Now, it's no secret that these projects come with a cost. But rebates and government paybacks will help. And we can't forget the costs recouped by ongoing savings from each program over time. The biggest payback of all, we're helping restore this amazing creation. Where will the money come from? Well, in addition to government rebates and other aid, reasonable low-cost financing is available through the PCUSA in the form of Restoring Creation loans. Yes, these bright ideas come at a cost, but we cannot ignore the even greater cost of doing nothing.
The time is now.
The time is now.
In the months ahead, the people of our church will be asked to think through these bright ideas together. There's some big projects with big challenges, but they invite us to live out our values and our commitment to care for our shared home.
Our faith compels us to take action, and circumstances compel us toward meaningful action now. We want to look our young people in the eye and honestly say, we are taking big steps to help build a safe future for you and to embrace the needs of generations.
This can be the next chapter in the story of one little church in the middle of one little town, a church that chooses not to bury its head in time of need, but confronts this very large and very urgent global issue. Because
The time is now. The time is now.
Kudos to the Presbyterians. It's pretty nice, despite the shameless use of children. It's a really nice piece of video, and it just kind of illustrates the point I want to make. We're not plowing new ground here. A lot of folks before us have been thinking about how do we deal with this as a faith community. And so you get a sense for the kind of disciplined review they went through, trying to understand their building. That's the process we've been going through as a carbon footprint team. So what are we supposed to do? Well, step one, I think, is just to get the right perspective. The picture you see there is Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. She is a world-class climate scientist and an evangelical Christian, and a really compelling voice for how to deal with this climate change, carbon pollution kind of problem. And she is fond of saying the number one thing any one of you can do is talk about it. All the surveys indicate that 70% of Americans want to take action on the climate change issue. But they don't talk about it because the presumption is, well, I'm the only one, and if I bring it up, I'll offend people, or I'll get into one of those arguments. The reality is, it's highly probable you're going to talk with somebody who agrees with you, and those of us who agree need to agree on how to move forward. So talk about it. Bring this topic up. Ms. Hayhoe likes to point out the fact that we're dealing with something she calls a 40-60 problem. 40% of what we need to adjust to is under your individual control. You choose what kind of vehicle to buy. You choose how many air flights to take in a year. You choose what kind of diet you're going to eat, where to set the settings on your HVAC system. There's no government police, no kilowatt police that are going to come to your house and say, all right, you've exceeded your use of electricity and we're shutting you down. That's not going to happen. That's a discipline that you yourself have to engage in. And if 40% of us did all of that, we would solve about 40% of the global problem. The reality is that's not enough, and it's not going to be definitive. I could eat green beans every meal for the rest of my life, and I'm not going to solve climate change. We need to have effective, logical public policy. And so the suggestion is, number one, do what's under your control, but also advocate for public policy. There are a lot of pieces of legislation that are bringing forward which would help address this issue. We all understand this is a tougher climate in which to bring forth those issues, but climate change doesn't care who's in charge of the White House. Climate change is progressing and we need to deal with it. So what are we supposed to do? Well, step two, you need to have information. What engineers call data. Want to make data-driven decisions based on actual measurements and information. So we have spent some time touring our building. We've taken a look at our utility bills, and we've begun to identify some potential actions that Hope Church could take. So if we take a look at our building, picture in the center is probably at least 100 years ago. That's the way Hope Church looked from the street level. The other pictures you see on the side are from about 7 or 8 years ago, before the remodel in the building of the chapel. So you can kind of see it on the right-hand side. That's the old courtyard that was there before the chapel space filled it. And this was not an unusual sight on the winter at Hope Church. Lots and lots of icicles, which is a clear advertisement of the fact that most of our heat is escaping through the roof. There's an area where maybe we could do some improvements. Ben took us on a tour of the basement, which is an intriguing place to be. But there's an old wall down there that's the 1870s basement wall, made out of stones all put together. It's still down there. There's a framed-in room for the organ bellows in there. It's got the interesting sign on the door which says Clubhouse. And yeah, the interesting story is that door was salvaged from the old Warm Friend Hotel. I guess there used to be a clubhouse where the who's who got together and had a few drinks and kind of cooked up policy for the city. And remodeling there, one of the Elzinga people salvaged the door and it ended up in our basement. Okay. Now, how they run the city these days, I don't know. But okay, there's a section where there's the original boiler used to be. So there's this kind of recessed, sunken floor, which was sort of what they did with boilers. If the water would overflow, it would be contained in a catchment basin. That's still down there. You'll see a lot of mechanical service lines down there. There is headroom to walk around without necessarily having to stoop and bend. And then there's things stored down there, I'm not sure why. Maybe we're waiting for that call from the Smithsonian for those antique fuse. Yeah. So, but that's the basement. Ben took us through the attic, and it is as difficult to get through as those pictures make it look. There are no clear paths or anything through the attic. It's a real labyrinth. I got kind of a kick out of, you can almost make it out on the right-hand side there. Somebody put up a sign, new attic. So, and I think that was for all the contractors that were up there running lines and whatever. They had to find their way through the labyrinth. But what data do we have to work with? Well, folks who take a look at this kind of a problem with energy use break it down into what they call 3 tiers. So imaginatively, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 is the fuel that you use on site. Okay? So in our case, natural gas, running the boiler system, electricity, and we have vehicles, church bus, church pastors have an allotment for the fuel they use. We use a certain amount of that. We haven't been able to assess that yet, so that hasn't figured into our thinking. It's not one of the bigger factors. But we take a look at, on this site, 77 West 11th Street, what kind of fuel gets used right here by us. Tier 2 are the fuels used by those who access the site. And so we have, most of you burn fuel getting here on a Sunday morning. That's part of our footprint. I think it's almost 15, maybe 20 years ago, we did an exercise here on a Sunday morning and asked how many gallons of gas does it take to run a worship service. Okay, it's quite a bit. Deliveries and mechanical service providers, people who are coming to the campus to provide services, that's a part of the footprint. And tier 3 is your sphere of influence. So if you're in a business, this may be your customers and how they use the product. In our case, I'm suggesting that be our parishioners in their own homes. I would really like to say that the church is more than a building on the corner of 11th Street. The church is the body of Christ throughout the community. And quite frankly, this body owns a lot of property. And so if we wanted to really push the analogy over time, These are the series of diagnostics you'd have to work through to try and solve all of that. Well, here's the data for gas. In 2024, we used 17,659.708 therms of gas. And you look at the bar chart there, and that's the kind of chart you would kind of expect for seasons. You know, more gas, January, November, December, it's cold, that makes sense. Far less in the summer. I think the only gas we use in the summer is probably hot water. And so, so if you're going to attack the problem, you have to attack the problem where it exists. And that suggests to me that maybe there are things we can do with the building envelope that may be able to seal up air leaks that allow heat to leak out. Maybe we could do another better job with insulation in the attic. Those are the kind of things you need to start taking a look at. We spent $10,171.29 on gas last year. Here's the electricity. And again, sort of what you would expect. Fairly steady throughout the year. It does spike up in the warm months, which kind of makes sense. Air conditioning starts to kick in during those months. But we used 187,318 kilowatt hours of electricity. And we spent $18,657.65 paying for that electricity in 2024. Okay? So that gives you kind of a picture of if we're going to save on utilities, that's the baselines we're looking at. Well, how do you interpret that data? We know for natural gas, when gas burns, a high temperature blue flame is produced and complete combustion takes place, producing only water vapor and carbon dioxide. What the little story doesn't tell you is you never have perfect combustion. There's going to be some carbon monoxide being produced. That's the reason you have a carbon monoxide detector in your house. If something goes wrong with that system, you need to have that warning. But for our purposes, water vapor is not an issue, but carbon dioxide is. It's one of the primary greenhouse gases. So if we take a look at Hope Church's annual combustion totals, natural gas, you've run through the conversion factors, and that means that our natural gas is producing 120 tons of carbon dioxide. We take a look at our electricity and run it through the conversion factors. We're producing 103 tons of carbon dioxide. Okay? So just as a point of reference that most of us can understand, you burn in your car 1 gallon of gas, that will produce 20 pounds of carbon dioxide. So just to give you a sense for how those are proportioned out. That is, you may have noticed the elephant. Oh, yeah. That is sort of the elephant in the room for us. You know, this carbon pollution we put in the air, it actually is physical mass that can be measured as a consequence of how we operate this building. And if I look at a male Asian elephant, weighs on average 5 tons. So that means we're putting the equivalent of 45 elephants into the air over Hope Church. That's where our opportunity is to do better. The little blue highlights you see are the electric elephants. The others are natural gas elephants. But, no way around it. That's the impact of operating this building. It's having a negative impact on our natural world. Okay. So, what are we supposed to do? Step 3 is to make a plan. If those are the facts, those are our opportunities for action, can we identify what our opportunities may be? We need to define our first step is, and then we need to start rallying resources towards implementing that solution. Okay. We have taken a look at solar panels as an option for this church. We tried to take a look at all the options that need to be addressed here. Some of them relate to the building envelope, better air sealing, better insulation. There are areas of this building that still need upgrading from old lighting systems and old HVAC components to that particular part of the building. Those are things on the table. We need to take a look at any number of things, but we tried to ask ourselves as a group, where could we most significantly make the biggest impact and be very visual about having made an impact? I worked for almost 10 years in residential energy efficiency, and one of the slogans that got passed around all the time was, attic insulation is not sexy. No, but you can't see it. Does a great job, has to be there, but you don't motivate people walking past your house. They don't say, you know, that house has great insulation.
In the winter sometimes.
Yeah.
The icicles.
No. But what they do say is, did you notice the new windows? Okay, oh, yeah. Things that are more visible get that first attention, regardless of how significant they may be. By the way, as somebody who audited houses, new windows is absolutely the last thing I'd ever recommend. Yeah, I won't get into that, but we had a visit with a solar panel provider who gave us an estimate on what it would take to put it here and what it would look like. So this is an aerial view of Hope Church and where solar panels could be placed. And largely south-facing, the bulk of them being on top of the education wing, you know, the flat roof. There's a lot of other flat roof up there and some south-facing roof. So if we were to move ahead with a proposal, this is sort of what it would look like from the street. And the reality is most of this is not visible when you're standing on the street because of the angles of the roof and so forth. The system as it was designed that you saw there would cover 62% of our electric energy use. Obviously, most of it in the prime time in the summer. The days are longer, sun's higher in the sky, you produce more electricity. But it would produce electricity year-round. And the one thing that's intriguing about this little graph, you can see that spot in the center that's lighter green. We expect in the summers we produce more electricity than we would actually use ourselves. And that electricity then goes back on the grid. Okay. If you want to be an advocate, I'm suggesting that you contact the Holland Board of Public Works because they have a very disincentive for solar. Anything you put on the grid, you can use that month. At the end of the month, it all cancels out. So if you have not used it, you forfeit that. So you're disincentivized to put in a bigger system because you'd put so much on the grid during prime time without really benefiting from that. So that's part of the reason this system is designed for 62%. So if we count the cost, the system you're looking at there was quoted at $229,298, just the base cost. There's a net project cost that gets down to $167,642, and that is because there is, from the Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022, a 30% rebate available to churches and nonprofit organizations. In the past, you as an individual homeowner could get a tax credit if you put solar on your house, 30%. That's still available. but you have to be a taxpayer to get a tax credit. The Inflation Reduction Act included folks who are not taxpayers who are in the nonprofit world. And once upon you complete the project, you are eligible to apply for that 30% return on investment. So they write you a check. There is some indication that there could be another 10% available. The Inflation Reduction Act gives an extra 10% to projects that include domestic content. And the supply chain in the United States is getting to the point where we could get a project that included that degree of domestic content that's being called for. So it's potential for another 10% there, but to be determined yet. So, but on the 30% rate, the cost drops down to $167,642. The contractor is projecting that in a 25-year span of time, we would have energy savings of $224,679. The anticipated savings, then, if you subtract out the amount you paid for it in the first place, means you come out positive about $57,037. So financially, that's kind of how those numbers work. There are options beyond getting just solar panels. Solar offsets are an option. You can go to the offset market and buy a share in a project somewhere else that is saving energy, and then get credit for some of that energy that's saved elsewhere. So the best example we have locally is the Holland Community Carbon Fund, which is collecting money from local folks, and then they use it on local projects. I feel a lot better about that one than I do about international carbon credits. International carbon credits are really hard to prove they actually really did what they said they would do. However, if we're working with a local organization through the Holland Community Foundation, I have a lot more confidence that they're actually doing what they said they were going to do. The carbon fund suggests that you think in terms of offsetting at $50 a ton. So if I look at just electricity, our 103 tons at $50 a ton would mean if we took this route, we would want to spend $5,150 a year as a contribution to the carbon fund. That would offset our electricity. If we did that for 25 years, just to compare, we would be spending $128,750. So in terms of math, that's kind of how it all works out. Next steps. There's always another hurdle. Anybody who's worked on these projects will tell you there's always another hurdle. The next one to get over is approval from the Holland Historic Commission. I was amused with the Presbyterians talking about their old building, 1957. What an old building to work on. What are we, 165 years? Something so. And a different kind of animal. But because we're in the historic district has to sign off on major changes to the exterior of a building so that it maintains the historic character. Okay? My joke is we're just going to buy old solar panels. But we have had a preliminary conversation with them, and they seem to be rather amenable to working on this. They don't want anything kind of in your face from the street, but as long as it's kind of following the roof line and not calling a lot of attention to itself, they're indicating we're comfortable with that, but come with a specific proposal. Okay. The other obstacle to get over now is identifying what our financial options are for solar. Hope Church as a body has a lot of decisions to be made on a lot of different budget items and moving forward. Dan Fisher will tell you he's got a list of all the future maintenance projects that need to be done into the future. You know, and we know from our Oregon renovation, for instance, somebody should have put that on their radar screen 20 years ago. You know, maybe it wouldn't have been as expensive as it was if we had been continually working at these things. So we understand the budget needs to work for all of the functions that take place at Hope Church. But how do we get to solar panels? We could borrow the money. I think the RCA has a fund that's potentially there. We could go to a bank. Borrowing money changes the calculus quite a bit in terms of rate of return, especially depending on what rate you get. Our solar panel supplier gave us two different charts, one if you borrowed at 4%, one if you borrowed at 7.5. At 7.5, you never break even. And at 4%, you might make $25,000 at the end. So preferably, if we could find a way to pay for it, then it's all our electricity all the time. We could do fundraising, it's an option. Can we find grants? Can we find donors? Those are the questions we're asking ourselves as a committee right now. If we wanted to move forward with this, how do we get the resources in place to be able to move forward? Interesting wrinkles on this. Our supplier was also indicating, you know, you guys ought to put in some EV chargers in the parking lot. That said it takes 3 panels to run an EV charger. So we could put in, it's suggesting put in 2. In other places that have done this, nonprofits and churches, then give you a credit card access to using the charger, and that pays off the charger over time. So that's one of the wrinkles that could be included here. I'm not sure what the cost for that is, but that's one of the wrinkles. So we have to make a decision. You know, do we want is offsets the way to go? Is trying to get the solar panels themselves the way to go? What's the best decision for Hope Church? And the other piece that we need to keep moving forward over time is other improvements to Hope Church building. This is kind of the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, in terms of cutting our carbon footprint. Highly visible, highly doable, no real challenging technology here. But there are lots of things which over time need to be addressed in terms of how does other energy in this building get used. Do we stay with natural gas forever? That's a question to be faced, for instance. So how do we identify and quantify those additional building improvements? Because we view solar panels as a first step to becoming a net neutral site. Okay. One of the things that intrigued us the most in speaking with a solar provider is because, you know, as the poster as you came in indicates, 60 churches in Michigan have already done this. And our solar provider is reporting that, you know what happened at those churches who did? Take a guess.
Attendance went up.
Yes, attendance went up. And particularly with younger people. That the community wants to know what are the values of these people and how do they follow through on what those values are. And when they see the value of creation being embraced by a congregation, people are beginning to say, I want to be associated with that group. And so it's one of the potential outcomes of this kind of a project. 25 years, I think I've been working creation care at Hope Church. After all that time, I've learned a few things. And my major conclusion is that all hard questions are ultimately spiritual questions. To whom am I responsible? What am I accountable for? Who's my neighbor? What's the right thing to do? And based on my experience as a person of faith and my experience with Christ, how do I express gratitude? And how do I express the reality of being secure in my faith? We're a place where people say nothing can separate you from the love of God. How do I live that out? I understand the panic over $230,000. I have the same $5 in my wallet that was there 3 months ago. I understand the panic over that. But we need to embrace what our values are. And one of my conclusions after 25 years is that brick and mortar talk just as loud as you do. And it's observable to people what your community values really are when you embrace those values. So that's kind of the big oversight, and I would invite your questions. Cindy.
Thanks, Peter. And I am somebody who looks around the neighborhood to see who has good insulation in their attic, because I can see the icicles. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in a house with big icicles. We weren't allowed to open the register because it would create more icicles. Big old 2-story house. Mm-hmm. What is the life durability of solar panels over 25 years? If it's going to take that long to see the payoff, I mean, in one respect, financially, I get there's multiple payoffs here. How good are these panels? I'm assuming you've built in the cost of this over time, that sometimes they deteriorate or the equipment fails.
Operation and maintenance was built into the quote. Panels are guaranteed for 25 years. It's understood that they deteriorate a little bit each year. So, you know, if it was a 1.3 watt panel, maybe it's 1 watt in 25 years. There's deterioration. There's no way around it. The reality is most panels are good for 40 years. So from 25 to 40, it's totally free electricity. You know, it may make sense at that point to revamp with newer panels because the technology is evolving all the time. I read articles every week about some big new breakthrough, and we've improved the efficiency of panels and new materials making them cheaper. You know, panels have dropped in price over the last 10 years about 90%. There's every expectation that as the supply chains mature, as engineering matures, that price trend will continue. So right now, electric panels are the cheapest alternative for new electricity. Cheaper than building a natural gas plant, certainly cheaper than even operating an existing coal-fired power plant. So the world is going this way. There's a lot of drag administratively in this country right now against that trend, but the world is moving this way, and this is where we're headed.
Okay. I've been instructed to remind everybody that this is being recorded.
So if BPW has a disincentive, did you investigate the idea of purchasing electric batteries for storage?
We did not. The contractor I spoke with indicates they don't believe it's quite there yet where he could recommend it. The technology is advancing rapidly, and he's thinking in a 5-year span, maybe that's more of a recommendation for this kind of a project. But we're not producing with this system much more electricity than we actually consume. So I don't know that it makes sense to have a battery for so little overcharge. But,
So 3 questions. One, do we set back the temperature in unused spaces at night and in the sanctuary in this room during the week when it's not used? That's first question. Second question, will we not be needing to re-roof in the next 25 years? Because I presume you wouldn't want to install panels if you're going to need to re-roof in another 3 or 4 years. And the third is the more complicated question, is this the most efficient way to do it, as opposed to placing solar panels in solar fields where there's more sun some distance away and could be more cheaply installed, or is the transmission cost kind of offsetting the greater efficiency of installation and use there?
Question one was,
Is temperature offset when the building's not in use?
my understanding is yes, they dial down sections of the building when they're not in use. And I think Bruce could tell us, I believe he can do that by remote control. So I don't think you even have to be in the building in order to make that change. I know we understood years ago when David Howley was director for the building, David lowered our bills immeasurably because he was so good at doing that sort of thing. So I think it's baked in.
Okay.
Okay. Question two was?
Second question was, will we be needing to re-roof?
Re-roofing is always a question. The group we're working with, Solar Faithful, at least at this point, has been indicating to their previous clients that they would come back one time and take them off and put them back. Okay. If that's in the contract going forward, we would need to confirm that. Okay. I understand the cost to do that is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000. Okay. And third.
The third question was, is it really maximally efficient for each church to do its own rather than to buy into a solar field in a sunnier place that could be more cheaply installed?
There is room for that. There was legislation in the Michigan legislature that didn't quite pass in the last lame duck, which would have authorized what's called community solar. When people think of solar, they think of two things. Your mind goes immediately to a picture, right? And you're looking at a house that has solar on the roof. That's one of your pictures. The other picture people go to immediately is 5,000 acres of solar panels. That's not what community solar is. Community solar is the equivalent of a pocket park. You may have an old industrial site that is amenable for solar development already embedded in the community. Community solar would have required the utilities to hook that up to the internet, but the transmission system, and would have required the utility companies to accept payments from the community solar developer. So the community solar would take subscriptions. So we could go to, if there were community solar, we could go to them and say, we would like X amount of kilowatt hours per year. How many panels is that? And we pay them for that. And then the electricity those panels produced would be credited on your current electric bill. So the legislation would require that they would have to accept the interlinking of those. That might be the most efficient way to do it, assuming the state of Michigan would ever allow it. Utility companies are very reluctant to not control anything that gets on their system. And that's related to a perverse incentive that they have. They can only raise rates if they experience capital improvements. So they have to build something new in order to go to the Public Service Commission and say, I need to raise my rates to pay for this. If somebody else is investing in it, they don't get that opportunity to raise their rates and return investment for their investors. So it's been a fight in the legislature. Yes.
My kids have had solar in their home in California, and they're now in Michigan and have solar. And the couple of things that I wasn't even thinking of is if you don't keep them clean, they're not near as efficient. So, you know, in the process of talking maintenance, is that part of what you've already discussed?
We haven't discussed cleaning panels. And there are mixed messages about that. There is some deterioration in output. Most contractors are saying a good rainfall cleans your panels. Personally, I clean mine periodically because my neighbor has an oak tree. And the green pollen at certain times of the year is just incredible. So I go up and I clean them off at that point in time, but most of the year I'm not worrying about it.
Particularly the ones in the flat roof is going to hold a lot more.
Yeah, so the ones on the flat roof would be set at an angle to catch the sun correctly, so there still would be runoff.
Okay. Here we go. Got it
Oh.
over here.
Will you send slides around, please, with, I started to try to write down the numbers about the tons and elephants, but would you send those slides around? I thought they were such good information. Is that possible?
I would think yes.
Or maybe a link? A link. Yeah.
I can talk to the church office and.
Thank you very much.
Peter, how confident are you that the government rebates will continue under the Trump administration? They're cutting everything else.
50-50, Brilt. What's not obvious in public is how much back pressure they're getting. For instance, most of the benefit of those clean energy credits have gone to Republican states. And you go to a Republican state and say, we just pulled the plug on your $3 billion energy plant. You know, they're catching that kind of pressure.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
We need a mic.
Coming into you.
How about Ottawa County, or don't they break it down that far?
We know that in Michigan's 4th congressional district, in excess of $3 billion of projects were announced related to the Inflation Reduction Act. How many of those survive without those incentives is another question. But no congressional district in Michigan got more input from that act than Michigan's 4th congressional district. Obviously, Bill, I don't know the future, Milt. But I am somewhat comforted by the fact of how fast Trump backs off when he encounters resistance. 21 Republican representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives sent a letter to Speaker Johnson saying, don't touch my rebates. And suggesting to him, you may have a hard time getting our vote on other issues if you do.
Peter, I have a question over here, and it comes from a kindergartner's perspective in the midst of graduate study work here, but it goes back to the first year arriving at our parish in upstate New York back in the 80s. I was given a tour of our building that was older almost than this building, and the tour guide was the chair of the property committee, and one of the things he pointed out when he took me into the sanctuary was, see those things up above the sanctuary, those are fans. During the wintertime, do not turn them off. And I saluted and didn't pay much attention. But about 6 months later, when the dead of winter came, for fun, I went in and turned them off, and within 3 minutes, the furnace came on. That comes to mind every so often during wintertime when I'm in our sanctuary and we do not have fans. Has that ever been discussed as a way of circulating the warm air that sits up there and doesn't benefit the sanctuary? In the case of the church building in upstate New York, those simple little fans did enormous work to bring that warm air circulating down.
Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to your question, if it's been addressed here. I do know that in COVID, we made significant improvements to our air handling systems. And I suspect that may have something to do with better circulation too, but I can't address your question. Feels like buying a new car, doesn't it? You kind of have that feeling like, oh, yeah. Cindy.
given that HVAC systems are a terror for those of us who wear hearing devices because it picks up the residual sound so incredibly well. What's the sound from a solar system, kind of solar panels generating electricity through the wires or circuitry, and what are some of the other side effects of that?
I can speak from experience of solar panels in my house. If I don't look up there, I don't know they're there. I've never heard anything. I mean, squirrels over the roof make more noise. So, but David has a question.
We have a home out west that has solar panels, and it produces no interference with the hearing aid telecoil use or anything like that. Also, we have a public utility that accepts credits during the summer, and so we build up credits that we then draw from in the winter when there's less usage. And it seems to me that would be very important for Holland Board of Public Works to embrace. And so I wonder if one thing we could do is either as a church, as a consistory maybe, or as a classis, speak to the Board of Public Works about this and the need to incentivize this. I mean, I don't think we should just leave this as an interesting idea. I think we should act.
Okay. And I don't mean to be disparaging about the Board of Public Works. One of the realities here is that every solar installer will tell you it's hard to make a solar project pencil out in Holland. And part of the reason is we have like the cheapest electric rates in the state. I can't complain about that. But if we were in consumers' energy territory, this would be a no-brainer. Because their rates are so much higher. I think we do have to anticipate rising rates. Most analysts say plan on 3% inflation creep every year. We do know that the state of Michigan has required that public utilities, all utilities in Michigan, be clean energy by 2040, I believe, maybe 2050, and some benchmarks along the way. And so the Board of Public Works is going to have to face the question, what are we going to do? We burn natural gas. How are we going to procure clean energy for this community? And my suspicion is that kind of a changeover is going to generate some costs of its own that will impact rates also. Now, obviously, I'm not the director of the Board of Public Works, and I'm not facing those issues, and I'm not sure what the issues are to face those issues, but I suspect those are on the horizon. David.
I hope it's a quick one.
I mean, it's just a comment. Winston Churchill said something like, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. And just to your comment about increasing attendance, and I hope if we do this, they're not completely invisible to people walking on the street, but we also might want to think about some way of making the savings visible to people who are in the building with some display or something so they can see in real time that this is having an impact.
Disappearing elephants?
Yes, indeed, indeed. Thank you, Peter. Fascinating data, information. Yes, very helpful. Thank you very much. And yes, as long as Peter is willing to have the slides, we can work with the church office to put that like in the church emails, and probably also where when we post the recording, it could also be available there. So we'll work with the church office to make that happen. Thank you. That's wonderful. I can tell you that, with our Circle Bible study, there are suggested links to various federal websites with simple things like 10 things you can do to combat climate change. I can tell you that all of those things have been removed. They are all gone. When you go to the federal websites for information about climate change, etc., they're gone. It's a it's blank, and it tells you that it's not available anymore. So I wrote my congressperson, and I encourage you to do the same. Check it out, but they've wiped out all the things about climate change. Just FYI. So, thank you. Thank you. We'll keep working at all of this. Thank you very much. I can tell you that next week, of course, is Easter. Today's Palm Sunday. And next week is Easter. And in this room, rather than adult ed, we will be celebrating with our Easter brunch. The week after that, Peter's team will be back. The Creation Care, in case you haven't figured this out, longtime members, Creation Care Ministry usually takes the 2 Sundays around Earth Day. So thus, Earth Day, April 22, so thus they have these 2 Sundays, which will hopefully happen next year as well. But the last Sunday of April will be 8th Day Farm, and Andy Rosendahl will be here from 8th Day Farm to talk about urban farming and other such things. So I invite you to join us then as well. Thank you.
That was a fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
That was just really, really well done. Is anybody given the thought to putting a roof over our parking lot? I mean,
I have.
I mean, it could be very simple. I mean, we're not talking about a rainproof roof.
No.
But that would be very visible, and it's a large area.
The problem is going to be a historic district, I suspect. I mean, we certainly can ask.
Yeah.
But this country of France now mandates that parking lots have solar panels over them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's open space.
Yeah, it's just, and in terms of being visible
Yeah.
and a large area,
Yeah.
and, I mean, you'd have to have the structure to hold them, but then it would be very inexpensive to install and maintain them
Yeah.
thereafter, and would provide some covering for cars and stuff.
Sure.
Anyway, it's just a thought.